Dr. Veltar wiped the dust from his 4 eyes and stared at the massive structure rising from the excavation site. The ancient ruins of Kethmorin had been calling to archaeologists for decades, but no one had ever found anything worth the dangerous journey to this dead world. The planet sat alone in the outer rim, its surface scarred by time and cosmic radiation, supposedly empty for over 50,000 years. But the energy readings that brought Veltar's team here suggested otherwise. The dig had been going for 3 months now, and each day brought new mysteries. The architecture was unlike anything in the galactic databases, built with materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The construction methods were sophisticated beyond current understanding, using techniques that modern engineers could barely comprehend. Most disturbing of all was the scale. Whoever built these structures had been thinking in terms of geological time, building to last forever. Veltar's assistant, a young fellow named Rix, came running across the dusty ground with excitement. In her golden eyes, she held a small crystalline object that pulsed with internal light, something they had never seen before. The crystal was warm to the touch and seemed to respond to their presence, growing brighter when they drew near. After hours of careful analysis, they realized it was some kind of data storage device, more advanced than anything in current galactic technology. The real breakthrough came when they discovered the archive chamber deep beneath the main structure. The room was vast, its walls lined with thousands of the glowing crystals, each one containing unimaginable amounts of information. The air itself seemed to hum with stored energy, and when they activated their translation matrices, the crystals began to sing in harmonious frequencies that made their scales and fur stand on end. The first translated documents made no sense. They spoke of star systems that no longer existed, of trade routes through regions now considered uninhabitable, and of technologies that seemed more like magic than science. But as the translation algorithms grew more sophisticated, patterns began to emerge. The documents weren't just random records, they were a systematic catalog of galactic history from a perspective no one had ever seen before. Then came the word that changed everything. Humans. The archive spoke of this species with a mixture of awe and fear that made Veltar's team uncomfortable. According to the records, humans came from a world called Terra, somewhere in what the current galactic charts labeled as the Dead Zone. They were described as bipedal mammals with unusual intelligence and an almost supernatural ability to adapt to any environment. The records painted them as apex predators who had somehow developed space travel and spread across the galaxy like a flood, but these weren't conquest records. The ancient civilization that created these archives had been documenting something far more complex. The humans, according to the texts, didn't just take territory, they transformed it. They built cities that worked in harmony with local ecosystems, developed technologies that enhanced rather than replaced natural processes, and somehow managed to bring peace to regions that had been war-torn for millennia. The most disturbing entries were the personal accounts. Individual records from the ancient species described encounters with humans that defied everything the current galactic community believed about predator species. The humans apparently showed mercy to defeated enemies, shared their advanced technologies freely, and seemed genuinely interested in helping other species reach their full potential. This wasn't the behavior of typical conquerors. It was the behavior of teachers. As the team worked through more of the archive, they found references to something called the First Expansion. According to the records, this was a period when humans spread throughout the galaxy not as invaders, but as explorers and pioneers. They established colonies on thousands of worlds, built massive space stations that served as hubs for interstellar travel, and created a network of communication relays that connected every corner of the galaxy. The technology described in these records was staggering. The humans had apparently developed faster-than-light travel that didn't require the massive energy expenditures current species used. They had solved the problems of food production, disease, and aging that still plagued most galactic civilizations. Most incredibly, they had developed some form of consciousness transfer that allowed them to exist in multiple bodies simultaneously, essentially making them immortal, but then the records took a darker turn. The later entries began to describe something the ancient chroniclers called the Great Silence. Over a period of just a few hundred years, the humans had simply stopped communicating. Their colonies went dark, their space stations fell silent, and their ships disappeared from the space lanes. The galaxy's dominant species had apparently vanished without a trace, leaving behind only empty cities and abandoned technology. The final entries in the archive were the most chilling. The ancient species had sent expedition after expedition to human worlds trying to understand what had happened. What they found were cities in perfect condition, as if their inhabitants had simply walked away. The technology was still functioning, the power systems still operational, but there was no sign of the humans themselves. It was as if an entire species had decided to leave the galaxy behind, but the last document in the archive contained a warning that made Veltaris' blood run cold. The ancient chroniclers had found evidence that the humans hadn't died out or been destroyed. They had evolved beyond the need for physical existence. The record suggested that they had transcended their biological limitations and become something far more than what they had been. And most terrifying of all, the evidence suggested that they were still watching. The document ended with a phrase that would haunt Veltar for the rest of his life. The humans did not leave forever. They left until they are needed again. As night fell over the excavation site, Veltar stood alone in the archive chamber, surrounded by the glowing crystals that contained the history of a species that had once ruled the galaxy. The implications were staggering. If the records were accurate, then everything the current galactic community believed about their own history was wrong. They weren't the first intelligent species to reach the stars. They were the second wave, growing up in the shadow of a civilization that had voluntarily stepped aside. The question that kept him awake was simple but terrifying. What would bring them back? The news from Kethmoron spread through the galactic communication networks like wildfire. Within 48 hours, every major species had received copies of the translated archives, and the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Chancellor Morden of the hegemony had seen many crises during his long career, but nothing had prepared him for the chaos that erupted when the galactic community learned about the humans. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was called for the first time in over 3 centuries. Representatives from dozens of species converged on the council station, their ships arriving in such numbers that traffic control had to establish waiting patterns stretching across 3 star systems. The ancient protocols for emergency sessions had to be hastily reviewed by historians who had never expected to use them. Ambassador Korth of the Reptilian Alliance was the first to speak when the session began. His scaled face was grim as he activated the central display, showing star charts that his people had kept sealed for generations. The charts depicted vast regions of space that their ancestors had declared forbidden, areas where their ships were instructed never to travel. According to the newly translated archives, these were the former territories of the human empire. The crystalline collective's representative, a being of living mineral called Shardara, resonated with frequencies that translated as deep concern. Their memory cores, she revealed, contained fragments of data that had never made sense until now. References to the Terran Exodus, mentions of the Great Departure, and cryptic warnings about the Watchers who remained behind. The collective had assumed these were mythological references, but the discovery on Kethmoran gave them new and terrifying meaning. Admiral Tog of the Aquatic Federation emerged from his mobile water tank to share his people's secrets. Deep in the ocean trenches of their homeworld, they had found ruins that their greatest scholars had never been able to explain. The structures were clearly artificial but used architectural principles that seemed alien to every known species. Now, comparing the symbols found in those ruins to the human script from the archives, the connections were undeniable. The Shadow Syndicate's representative remained cloaked in darkness, speaking through a voice synthesizer that made their words sound like whispers from the void. Their contribution was perhaps the most disturbing of all. The Syndicate had spent millennia mapping the hidden places of the galaxy, cataloging every secret and mystery they could find. Their star charts showed dozens of locations where their scouts had encountered technology that defied explanation, devices that were clearly artificial, but seemed to be watching and waiting. As each species shared their hidden knowledge, a picture began to emerge that shook the very foundations of galactic civilization. The humans hadn't just existed, they had been everywhere. Every species represented in the council had some record of their presence, whether in ancient ruins, forbidden territories, or unexplained technologies. The galaxy that they all called home had once belonged to someone else. Dr. Veltar was invited to present his findings directly to the council. His hands shook as he activated the holographic displays, showing images from the archive chamber and translations of the most significant documents. The assembled representatives listened in stunned silence as he described the scope of the human empire, the advanced technologies they had developed, and the mysterious circumstances of their disappearance. The most disturbing revelation came when Veltar showed them the final entries in the archive. The ancient chroniclers had found evidence that the humans hadn't died out, they had evolved beyond physical existence. The record suggested that they had transcended their biological limitations through technologies that current galactic science couldn't even comprehend. They had become something more than mortal beings, capable of existing in multiple forms simultaneously. Chancellor Morden's voice cracked as he asked the question that everyone was thinking. If they evolved beyond physical existence, why did they leave these archives? What were they trying to tell us? The answer came from an unexpected source. The ethereal communes, a species of energy beings who rarely participated in galactic politics, had sent a representative to the emergency session. The being appeared as a shifting pattern of light and spoke in harmonics that bypassed the translation systems and spoke directly to the minds of those present. The ethereals revealed that they possessed collective memories that stretched back to the time of the human empire. Through their unique form of consciousness, they had preserved actual interactions with humans from 50,000 years ago. The truth they shared was both comforting and terrifying. The humans had left by choice, not because they were forced to. They had reached a point in their evolution where physical existence had become a limitation rather than a necessity. But they hadn't abandoned the galaxy. They had established a vast network of monitoring systems to watch over the species that would develop after their departure. The galaxy was being observed, studied, and protected by their former rulers, but there was more. The ethereals revealed that the humans had established what they called a return protocol. If the galaxy ever faced a threat that the younger species couldn't handle, or if the galactic community proved unable to maintain peace and stability, the humans would return to restore order. The monitoring systems weren't just observing, they were evaluating whether their intervention was needed. The council chamber erupted into chaos as the implications sank in. Every war, every conflict, every act of aggression had been recorded and analyzed by the absent humans. The species that had grown up in their shadow were being tested, and the results would determine whether they would be allowed to continue governing themselves or whether their former rulers would return to take control. Ambassador Korth stood up, his reptilian features pale with shock. "How long do we have?" he asked. "How long before they decide we failed their test?" The ethereal's response sent chills through every being present. The monitoring systems had been recording increased conflict throughout the galaxy. Territorial disputes, resource wars, and diplomatic failures were all being cataloged and analyzed. The data suggested that the return protocol might be closer to activation than anyone wanted to admit. As the session continued deep into the night, one fact became clear to everyone present. The galaxy they thought they knew was an illusion. They were not the masters of their own destiny. They were students being evaluated by teachers who had the power to return at any moment. The question was no longer whether the humans would come back, but what they would find when they did. The weeks following the emergency session transformed the galaxy into a massive archaeological expedition. Every species contributed resources to what became known as the Human Heritage Project, the largest coordinated research effort in galactic history. Task forces were dispatched to hundreds of worlds, following leads from the ancient archives and the newly revealed knowledge that each species had been hiding. The discoveries were staggering and terrifying in equal measure. On the industrial world of Freedom, mining operations had to be completely halted when excavation crews broke through into enormous underground complexes. The chambers stretched for kilometers beneath the planet's surface, filled with manufacturing equipment that dwarfed anything in the current galaxy. The machines were dormant but perfectly preserved, their dark surfaces reflecting no light and giving off no energy signatures. Engineer Dax of the Mechanoid Collective spent days analyzing the equipment before admitting defeat. The technology was so advanced that his people couldn't even identify what the machines were designed to produce. The power systems were completely alien, requiring no external energy source and apparently capable of running indefinitely. Most disturbing of all, the machines seemed to be waiting for something, activation codes that the archive suggested only humans possessed. The fortress world of Bastionkar revealed defensive installations that made the current galactic military establishments look like toys. Massive weapon emplacements were built directly into the planet's crust, their targeting systems still functional after 50,000 years. The weapons themselves were based on principles that current science couldn't explain, capable of striking targets anywhere in the star system with perfect accuracy. General Thane of the Warrior Caste studied the defensive systems with growing unease. The installations weren't just designed to protect the planet, they were built to defend against threats that the current galactic species didn't even understand. The targeting databases contained references to enemy types that had no match in any known taxonomy, suggesting that the humans had faced challenges that went far beyond conventional warfare. But the most disturbing discoveries were made on worlds throughout the galactic core. Research teams found what appeared to be monitoring stations, still somehow functional after 50,000 years of abandonment. The stations were small, often hidden in natural formations or disguised as native structures, but their purpose was unmistakable. They were observation posts, silently watching and recording everything that happened in their vicinity. Dr. Veltar's team discovered the largest of these monitoring stations on a forgotten moon in the outer rim. The facility was built into the moon's core, its sensors extending throughout the satellite structure like a vast nervous system. The amount of data stored in its memory banks was staggering, detailed records of every ship that had passed through the system, every communication that had been transmitted, and every event that had occurred within sensor range. The data archives revealed that the monitoring stations had been tracking the development of every species that had arisen after the human departure. Population growth, technological advancement, social evolution, and political development. Everything was recorded and analyzed, according to criteria that the researchers couldn't fully understand. The stations weren't just observing, they were grading the galaxy's progress against some unknown standard. Captain Ral of the Explorer Corps made perhaps the most chilling discovery of all. While investigating a seemingly dead system on the galactic rim, his team detected a massive energy signature emanating from what appeared to be empty space. Closer investigation revealed a structure of incredible size, invisible to normal sensors but clearly artificial. The installation was actively broadcasting, sending signals on frequencies that current technology could barely detect. The message was simple but terrifying. We are watching. We are waiting. We remember. The broadcast was continuous, repeating endlessly in the ancient human language. But analysis of the signal's origin suggested something that made the Discovery team's blood run cold. The transmission wasn't coming from an automated system, it was being generated by something that showed signs of active intelligence. Someone or something was still there, still watching, still waiting for the right moment to act. As reports flooded in from across the galaxy, a pattern began to emerge that filled the Galactic Council with dread. The human monitoring network was vast and sophisticated, covering every inhabited system and many that were thought to be empty. The galaxy was under constant observation by systems that had been operating for 50,000 years, recording every detail of the younger species' development, The most disturbing realization came when the research teams began to correlate the data from different monitoring stations. The information wasn't just being collected, it was being analyzed and compiled into comprehensive reports that tracked the overall health of galactic civilization. Wars were noted and their outcomes evaluated. Technological developments were cataloged and their implications assessed. Social changes were documented and their effects on galactic stability measured. The reports painted a picture of a galaxy being carefully studied by absent guardians who were trying to determine whether their former subjects were ready for independence. Every conflict, every diplomatic failure, every act of aggression was being weighed against some unknown standard. The younger species weren't just living their lives, they were taking a test that had been running for 50,000 years. Dr. Veltar made one final discovery that changed everything. Deep in the monitoring station's core, he found a chamber that had been sealed since the station's construction. Inside was a single crystal, larger and more complex than anything they had found before. When activated, it projected a holographic message that made the entire research team step back in shock. The figure in the hologram was unmistakably human, bipedal, mammalian, with features that seemed familiar despite being from a species none of them had ever seen. The being spoke in the ancient human language, but the translation was clear and direct. If you are seeing this message, then you have found our watchers and learned of our vigil. We did not leave you alone. We left you free to grow and develop without our interference. But we have been watching, hoping that you would prove worthy of the galaxy we once called home. The message continued, revealing the true purpose of the monitoring network. The humans hadn't just evolved beyond physical existence. They had taken responsibility for nurturing the species that would inherit the galaxy. The monitoring stations were part of a vast educational program designed to guide the younger species toward maturity without direct intervention. But the message also contained a warning. The monitoring systems were approaching a critical evaluation point. Recent conflicts and increasing tensions throughout the galaxy were being analyzed to determine whether the younger species were capable of maintaining peace and stability on their own. If they failed to meet the standards the humans had established, the return protocol would be activated. The hologram faded, leaving the research team in stunned silence. They had found the answers they were looking for, but those answers raised even more terrifying questions. The galaxy they thought they knew was actually a vast classroom, and they were students being evaluated by teachers who had the power to return at any moment. The question was no longer whether the humans would come back, it was what grade they would give to their former subjects. The discovery of the holographic message sent shockwaves through the galactic community that made the original archive findings seem small in comparison. Within days, every major world had received copies of the humans' final message, and the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Some species called for immediate military preparation, convinced that the humans would return as conquerors. Others demanded complete pacification, hoping to prove their worthiness through total peace. The galaxy teetered on the edge of chaos. As billions of beings grappled with the knowledge that they had been living under observation for 50,000 years, Chancellor Morden found himself at the center of a crisis unlike anything in galactic history. The council chambers were filled with representatives demanding action, but no one could agree on what that action should be. The warrior caste wanted to prepare for war, while the peaceful union advocated for immediate disarmament. The merchant guilds were concerned about the economic implications of the revelation, while the scientific collective wanted to focus on understanding the human technology they had discovered. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The ethereal communes, who had remained largely silent since their initial revelation, requested a private audience with the council leadership. Their representative appeared as a shimmering pattern of light that seemed to shift and flow like liquid energy. When they spoke, their words bypassed the translation systems and resonated directly in the minds of those present. "We have been waiting for this moment," the ethereal said, their voice carrying harmonics that suggested vast age and wisdom. "We have preserved memories of the time before the great departure, memories that we have shared with no one until now. The truth about the humans is more complex than your archives suggest. The ethereal began to share memories that stretched back to the height of the human empire. Through their unique form of consciousness, they had preserved actual interactions with humans from 50,000 years ago. The images they projected were vivid and startling, showing humans not as the distant, godlike beings the archives suggested, but as individuals who struggled with the same challenges that faced all intelligent species. The memories revealed that the humans had indeed achieved technological transcendence, but not without cost. Their evolution beyond physical existence had been driven by necessity rather than choice. They had encountered something in the deep cosmos, a threat so vast and alien that conventional life forms couldn't comprehend it, much less fight it. The humans had been forced to evolve beyond their biological limitations in order to defend not just themselves, but all life in the galaxy. The Great Departure hadn't been an abandonment, it had been a strategic retreat. The humans had left physical existence behind to fight a war in dimensions that the younger species couldn't even perceive. They had established the monitoring network not just to observe, but to protect the galaxy while they battled entities that existed beyond normal space and time. But the most startling revelation was yet to come. The ethereal's memory showed that the war was ending. The cosmic threat that had forced the humans to transcend physical existence was finally being defeated. The monitoring stations weren't just collecting data about the younger species. They were preparing for the humans' return to normal existence. The return protocol wasn't a test of worthiness, it was a homecoming preparation system. The humans had always intended to return to the galaxy, but only after they had secured it against the threats that lurked in the spaces between dimensions. The monitoring stations were evaluating whether the galaxy was ready for their return, not as conquerors or judges, but as neighbors and equals. The ethereal's final memory was the most profound of all. It showed a human commander standing on the bridge of a ship that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, speaking to a gathering of the galaxy's most advanced species. The commander's words were simple but carried the weight of absolute truth. We go now to fight for all life, not just our own. When we return, we hope to find that you have grown beyond the need for our protection. The impact of these revelations was immediate and transformative. The panic that had gripped the galaxy began to shift into something else, anticipation mixed with nervous excitement. The humans weren't returning as conquerors or judges, they were coming home after a war that had lasted 50,000 years. But the revelations also brought new responsibilities. If the humans were preparing to return to normal existence, the galaxy needed to be ready to welcome them back. The monitoring stations were still evaluating the younger species' development, and the results would determine what kind of relationship would exist between the returning humans and the civilizations that had grown up in their absence. Dr. Veltar made another crucial discovery in the weeks that followed. Deep in the monitoring station's databases, he found files that had been sealed until specific conditions were met. The files contained detailed plans for the humans' return, not as a conquest, but as a reintegration. The plans showed how human technology could be shared with the younger species, how their knowledge could be used to benefit all life in the galaxy, and how the two groups could work together to build a better future. But the plans also contained warnings. The cosmic threat that had forced the humans to transcend physical existence hadn't been completely eliminated. There were still entities lurking in the deep cosmos, waiting for opportunities to invade normal space. The galaxy would need to be united and prepared to face these threats when they eventually returned. The monitoring stations began to change their behavior as the reintegration protocols activated. Instead of simply observing, they started broadcasting educational materials designed to help the younger species understand the threats they would face. Technical manuals appeared in databases throughout the galaxy, describing technologies that could be used to defend against interdimensional attacks. Strategic plans were shared that showed how different species could work together to create a unified defense network. The most significant change came when the monitoring stations began to communicate directly with the galactic governments. The messages were simple but profound. We are coming home. Are you ready to stand with us? The response from the galactic community was overwhelming. Species that had been at war for centuries suddenly found themselves working together to prepare for the humans' return. The warrior caste began sharing their military expertise with the peaceful Union, while the scientific collective collaborated with the merchant guilds to develop new technologies. The galaxy was transforming itself from a collection of competing civilizations into a unified community ready to welcome back their former guardians. But as the preparations continued, long-range sensors began to detect massive energy signatures in the galactic void beyond the outer rim. The signatures matched theoretical projections for human technology, but they were larger and more complex than anything in the historical records. The humans weren't just returning, they were returning transformed by 50,000 years of interdimensional warfare. The galaxy held its breath as the energy signatures grew stronger and began to move toward inhabited space. The monitoring stations fell silent, their long vigil finally complete. In the depths of space, something vast and ancient stirred, preparing to return to the galaxy it had left behind so long ago. The humans were coming home, and the galaxy would never be the same. The energy signatures were getting stronger every day, and the galaxy found itself facing a moment that would define its future for millennia to come. The monitoring stations had completed their evaluation and transmitted their findings to the approaching human fleet. The response came back within hours, a simple message that carried the weight of 50,000 years of separation. We are pleased with what you have become. The choice of what comes next is yours. Chancellor Morden stood before the assembled Galactic Council, his aged features showing the strain of the past months. The chamber was packed with representatives from every known species, their faces reflecting a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The moment they had been preparing for had finally arrived, and the decisions they made in the next few hours would shape the future of galactic civilization. The human fleet had taken position at the edge of the outer rim, their ships visible as bright points of light against the cosmic background. The vessels were unlike anything in the historical records, vast constructs that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their hulls shifting between different states of matter as they moved through space. They were beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, representing technologies that the current galactic civilizations could barely comprehend. Dr. Veltar had been studying the transmissions from the human fleet, trying to understand the nature of the beings who had once ruled the galaxy. The communications were complex beyond anything he had encountered, carrying multiple layers of meaning that suggested the humans had indeed evolved far beyond their original forms. But beneath the alien sophistication, he could still detect traces of the species that had once walked on solid ground and breathed natural air. The first direct communication from the human fleet arrived during the council session, broadcast simultaneously to every inhabited world in the galaxy. The message was simple but profound, delivered in a voice that seemed to carry the wisdom of ages. Children of the galaxy, we have returned from our long war. We have seen what you have accomplished in our absence, and we are proud of what you have become. The choice of how we proceed together is yours to make. The voice belonged to someone who identified themselves as Admiral Terra, commander of the Human Expeditionary Force. The name carried symbolic weight. Terra had been the human homeworld, the place where their species had first reached for the stars. The choice of designation suggested that the humans still remembered their origins. Despite their transformation, Admiral Terra's message continued, offering the galactic community three options for the future. The first was complete independence. The humans would withdraw to the edges of the galaxy, serving as distant guardians who would only intervene if the younger species faced threats they couldn't handle alone. The second was partnership. The humans would share their advanced technologies and knowledge, working alongside the galactic community as equals to build a better future. The third was integration. The humans would resume their role as leaders of galactic civilization, guiding the younger species toward higher forms of existence. The debate that followed was intense and emotional. The warrior caste argued for independence, insisting that the galactic community had proven itself capable of governing without outside interference. The scientific collective favored partnership, eager to gain access to human knowledge and technology. The ethereal communes advocated for integration, believing that the humans' advanced wisdom was necessary to guide the galaxy toward its full potential. But the most compelling argument came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Rix, the young Feloid who had worked with Dr. Veltar on the original excavation, stood up to address the council. Her golden eyes reflected the wisdom she had gained from studying the human archives, and her voice carried the conviction of someone who had seen the truth with her own eyes. "We have learned about the humans' past," she said, her words carrying clearly through the chamber. "We have seen their technology and marveled at their achievements. But the most important thing we have discovered is not what they accomplished, but why they left. They didn't abandon us, they sacrificed everything to protect us from threats we couldn't even imagine. They spent 50,000 years fighting a war in dimensions we can't perceive, all to ensure that we would have the chance to grow and develop in safety." Her words struck a chord with the assembled representatives. The humans hadn't been absent rulers or distant gods, they had been guardians, who had given up their physical existence to protect the galaxy from cosmic threats. The monitoring stations hadn't been surveillance systems, they had been watchful parents keeping their children safe while they fought monsters in the dark. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. The galactic community chose partnership, recognizing that they had grown beyond the need for guardianship, but not beyond the value of cooperation. The humans would be welcomed back, not as rulers or subjects, but as equals who had earned their place through sacrifice and dedication. The response from the human fleet was immediate and joyful. The energy signatures that had seemed so alien and threatening began to shift and change, revealing themselves to be massive construction platforms rather than warships. The humans hadn't returned as conquerors, they had returned as builders, ready to help create a galaxy where all species could thrive together. The first human ship to enter normal space was a vessel of incredible beauty, its hull reflecting the light of nearby stars while simultaneously generating its own internal illumination. The ship docked at the council station, and the galaxy held its breath as the first humans to walk on solid ground in 50,000 years emerged from their vessel. They were recognizably human, but changed by their long journey through dimensions beyond normal space. Their forms seemed to shift slightly as they moved, as if they existed in multiple states simultaneously. Their eyes held depths that spoke of experiences beyond normal understanding, and their movements carried the grace of beings who had transcended physical limitations but chose to embrace them once again. Admiral Terra was the first to speak, her voice carrying harmonics that bypassed translation systems and spoke directly to the hearts of those who heard her. "We are home," she said simply. "We have returned to the galaxy we never stopped loving, to stand beside the children we never stopped watching. The war is over, the threats are defeated. Now we can build the future together." The celebration that followed lasted for days, as species throughout the galaxy welcomed their returning guardians. The humans shared their knowledge freely, teaching technologies that could heal worlds and extend life. They told stories of their long war against entities that existed beyond normal space, describing battles fought in dimensions where thought became reality and will became weapon. But most importantly, they listened. They learned about the civilizations that had grown up in their absence, marveling at the diversity and creativity that had flourished while they were gone. They discovered that their children had indeed grown beyond the need for protection, becoming something worthy of respect and admiration. The galaxy that emerged from this reunion was stronger than anything that had come before. Human technology, combined with the innovations of the younger species, created wonders that neither could have achieved alone. The monitoring stations were transformed into communication relays that connected every inhabited world, creating a network of cooperation that spanned the galaxy. But perhaps the most significant change was psychological. The younger species no longer felt like orphans in a vast, uncaring universe. They had parents who had fought for them, guardians who had sacrificed everything to keep them safe. The humans no longer felt like exiles from their own galaxy. They had come home to find that their sacrifice had been worthwhile, that their children had grown into something beautiful and strong. The galaxy had become a family, united by shared purpose and mutual respect. The ancient archives on Kethmorin were preserved as a reminder of the journey that had brought them all together, and the monitoring stations continued their work, no longer as watchers but as guardians of the peace that had finally been achieved. In the end, the return of the humans had given the galaxy something it had never truly possessed before: hope for a future where all species could thrive together, protected by the knowledge that they were not alone in the vast darkness of space.